Elias learned early that applause was not meant for him, it was meant for his brother. The first time he understood this, he was 7 years old, standing on a wooden chair in a crowded living room while relatives clapped for Daniel's school award. Daniel held a small gold-colored trophy above his head, grinning as though he had discovered fire. Their mother cried. Their father laughed too loudly. An aunt said, "That boy will go far." Elias stood beside the table, holding the empty cake box. No one had asked him to. He had simply noticed it was in the way. He did not feel anger then. He felt something quieter, something that felt like stepping back so someone else could step forward. It would become a habit. By the time he was 34, Elias had perfected the art of being useful. He had a solid position at a logistics firm, where he ensured that mistakes did not happen. Not prevented disasters, that would have been too visible. He corrected numbers, adjusted routes, softened complaints before they reached management. His name rarely appeared in reports. That was considered a compliment. He rented a modest apartment with walls the color of diluted milk. The furniture was sturdy, practical, unremarkable. Nothing in the space demanded attention. He preferred it that way, or at least, he had convinced himself he did. The evening everything began to shift. He was seated at the end of a long restaurant table beneath a string of dim amber lights. Daniel's promotion dinner. His younger brother had become regional director at 29. The youngest in company history, someone said proudly. Elias clapped when appropriate. He refilled water glasses. He passed the bread basket. Their father stood to give a toast. To Daniel, he declared, raising his glass. Brilliant. Fearless. Always reaching higher. The table hummed with approval. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added with a chuckle, and to Elias, of course, the steady one. Not the brightest star, but the one who keeps things from falling apart. Laughter rippled across the table, friendly laughter, affectionate laughter. Elias smiled. It was a well-practiced smile, the kind that required no teeth, but something inside him, something small and tightly coiled, shifted, not anger, not humiliation, recognition. He had been defined, and worse, he had accepted the definition. Later that night, he walked home alone. Daniel had invited him to continue the celebration elsewhere, but Elias had declined. He claimed fatigue. The truth was more difficult to name. As he walked, fragments of memory arranged themselves like pieces of a pattern he had never fully examined. When Daniel broke a window as a child, Elias had confessed to throwing the ball too hard. When Daniel forgot an assignment, Elias had stayed up late helping him recreate it. When Daniel panicked before a public speaking competition, Elias had sat beside him and said, "You'll be fine. You always are." He had meant it every time, but somewhere along the way, something subtle had happened. Daniel had grown larger, Elias had grown quieter. He had mistaken absence of conflict for peace. He had mistaken usefulness for worth. At work, the pattern repeated. 3 months after he trained a new hire named Martin, management promoted Martin to supervisor. "You're excellent at mentoring," his boss told him kindly. "Some people just aren't leadership material. But what you do is invaluable." Invaluable, the word landed heavily. Invaluable meant necessary, necessary meant functional, functional meant replaceable. That night, alone in his apartment, Elias stood in the kitchen staring at nothing in particular. He was not unhappy, that was the problem. He was not happy either. He existed in a narrow band of emotional neutrality, as though life had been reduced to a stable temperature that never warmed or froze. He tried to imagine what would happen if he vanished. Daniel would still shine, the company would still operate, the world would adjust. The thought did not wound him, it unsettled him. A week after the dinner, a woman transferred into his department. Her name was Marianne. She was in her late 50s, with sharp gray eyes and a voice that carried no apology. She did not attempt to be agreeable. On her third day, she observed him quietly correcting a scheduling error that would have embarrassed Martin. "You fixed that without telling him," she said. "It was faster," Elias replied. "For whom?" He hesitated. "For everyone." She studied him. "Or because you prefer being necessary rather than visible?" The question struck him with surprising force. "I don't mind staying out of the spotlight," he said evenly. She shrugged. "People who truly don't mind don't talk about it." He said nothing. She returned to her desk, but something in her expression suggested she had placed him into a category he did not fully understand. Over the following weeks, Marianne continued observing him. She noticed how he deferred in meetings, how he framed suggestions as questions, how he credited others for ideas he had refined. One afternoon, after he had once again absorbed responsibility for a team oversight, she closed the door to the conference room and said quietly, "You make yourself small so others feel tall." The words felt almost indecent in their accuracy. "That's not," he began, and then, she continued calmly, "you resent them for standing." Silence filled the space between them. He did not deny it, because he could not. That night, Elias sat at his kitchen table long after midnight. He tried to identify the resentment she had named. It was not loud, it was not explosive, it was a thin, persistent thread that ran beneath everything. He resented Daniel's confidence. He resented Martin's promotion. He resented being described as steady, not because steadiness was unworthy, but because it was safe, and safe had become a cage. For the first time, he allowed himself to ask a dangerous question: what would happen if he stopped being the reliable one? The thought frightened him, it also thrilled him. 2 weeks later, an internal announcement circulated: a new branch was opening in another town several hours away. It required someone experienced, someone who understood systems deeply, someone willing to take responsibility for launching operations from the ground up. It was risky. Failure would be visible, success would be undeniable. Elias read the announcement 3 times. He closed the email. He reopened it. Marianne appeared at the edge of his desk. "You're thinking about it," she said. "I'm not management material." "That's not what I said." He looked at her. For once, he did not look away. "I don't know how to be anything else," he admitted. She nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it's time you find out." That evening, Daniel called. "You won't believe it," his brother said excitedly. "They're considering expanding internationally. If it happens, I might head the project." "That's impressive," Elias said automatically. "You've always been good at staying grounded," Daniel continued. "I don't know how you do it." Elias felt something tighten. He imagined telling Daniel about the new branch opportunity. He imagined the pause, the subtle concern. "Are you sure that's wise?" He realized then that Daniel did not intend to diminish him. Daniel simply assumed Elias preferred safety, because Elias had taught him to believe it. The decision did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It unfolded quietly over days. He drafted an application, deleted it, redrafted it. Finally, one morning before he could reconsider, he sent it. His hands trembled afterward, not from fear of rejection, from fear of acceptance. When the approval came, it was brief and efficient. "You're the best candidate," his boss said. "If you're willing to take the risk." Willing, the word echoed. "Yes," Elias replied. His voice sounded unfamiliar. Telling his family proved more complicated. At Sunday dinner, he waited until dessert. "I've accepted a position in another town," he said evenly. "I'll be leaving next month." The reaction was immediate. "Leaving?" His mother asked. "But why?" Daniel said. "You're stable where you are." "It's an opportunity," Elias said. His father frowned slightly. "There's no guarantee it will succeed." "I know." "That doesn't sound like you," Daniel added gently. And there it was, not cruel, not mocking, simply factual. "That doesn't sound like you." For the first time in his life, Elias allowed himself to respond without cushioning others. "Perhaps you don't know what I sound like." Silence followed, not hostile, but unsettled. He realized then that growth did not require shouting, it required refusal. The night before his departure, he packed his belongings into 2 suitcases. There was very little to sort through. He paused in the center of the apartment and looked around. This space had been safe, predictable, contained. He felt gratitude for it. But he did not feel regret. At dawn, without ceremony, without farewell speeches, he boarded a train. As it pulled away, he experienced something unfamiliar, not certainty, not confidence, but ownership. Whatever happened next, success or failure, would not be an accident of being overlooked, it would be the result of choice. For the first time in his life, he was not steady ground beneath someone else's ascent, he was stepping into uncertain sky, and he did not know whether he would fall, only that he was finally willing to find out. The new town did not welcome him with drama. There were no storms, no symbolic omens, just a modest office space with bare walls, unopened boxes, and a staff of 6 who looked at him the way people look at temporary furniture, cautiously, without attachment. Elias understood the look. He had worn it himself when supervisors rotated through his old department. He introduced himself without embellishment. "I'm here to build something functional," he said. "And to make sure it lasts." The words felt safe. Practical, he almost hated them. The first weeks were exhausting. Launching a branch required decisions that could not be hidden inside spreadsheets. He had to choose vendors, approve budgets, set expectations. Every decision carried his name. When a shipment was delayed due to a miscalculation in projected volume, the oversight could not be quietly corrected at night. It became a meeting, a discussion, an explanation. "We trusted the numbers," one staff member said carefully. Elias felt heat rise in his chest. The numbers were his. In the past, he would have softened the blame, absorbed it, shielded others from embarrassment. Now there was no one above him to shield. The silence in the room stretched. He had 2 choices: deflect, or own it. "I underestimated the demand," he said finally. "That's on me. We adjust and we learn." The words tasted sharp, but something inside him steadied, not the old steadiness of invisibility, a new kind, one that required exposure. That night, alone in his rented room above a small bakery, he lay awake. Failure felt louder here. Back home, mistakes dissolved into the background of other people's achievements. Here, errors echoed. He questioned himself constantly. Was he decisive enough? Was he respected? Did they see him as capable, or simply appointed? He caught himself drafting apology emails in his mind for errors that had not yet occurred. The urge to retreat pressed against him like a tide. It would be easy to return. He imagined calling Daniel. "I tried," he would say lightly. It wasn't the right fit. His family would not mock him. They would welcome him back into the shape he had always occupied. Safe, predictable, chosen last, but at least chosen. The thought both comforted and suffocated him. 2 months in, the real fracture came. A major client withdrew from a preliminary agreement after miscommunication between departments. The mistake was not entirely his, but the responsibility was. The client's final words over the phone were polite but firm. "We're not confident in the leadership of this branch." Leadership, the word pierced deeper than the loss itself. That evening, Elias remained in the office long after the others left. He sat at the desk staring at the reflection of his own face in the darkened window. "You are not leadership material." The phrase resurfaced, not from anyone present, but from echoes of years past. He realized something then. He had internalized the label long before others had spoken it aloud. He had built his identity around limitation. Being overlooked had been painful, but it had also been protective. If no one expected brilliance, no one could be disappointed by its absence. He had hidden behind steadiness. Now there was nowhere to hide. The next morning, instead of drafting a careful explanation to headquarters, he did something he had never done before. He called a meeting. All 6 employees gathered around the table. Their expressions were guarded. "I failed to oversee communication between departments," he began. "We lost a client because of it." He let the words stand without cushioning them. "I won't excuse it. But I also won't allow it to define this branch." He paused, feeling his pulse in his throat. "If you see a flaw in how I'm leading, say it." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, one of the younger staff members, Alina, spoke. "You don't delegate," she said carefully. "You redo things yourself." Another added, "It feels like you don't trust us." The word struck harder than the client's criticism. He wanted to argue, to explain that he was protecting them. Instead, he listened, and for the first time, he understood something devastating. He had not just made himself small in the past, he had made others dependent on his smallness. He had built quiet hierarchies where he carried the weight so others could remain lighter. It had felt generous. It had also been controlling. If he was indispensable, he could not be ignored. Marianne's voice returned, "You make yourself small so others feel tall." But she had left out the second layer. He also made himself necessary so he would not be abandoned. That afternoon, he began delegating tasks fully, not as tests, but as trust. It was uncomfortable. Mistakes happened. He resisted the urge to intervene prematurely. Progress was slower, but something subtle shifted in the room. Conversations grew more direct. Ideas surfaced without his prompting. He began to see that leadership was not brilliance, it was restraint and vulnerability. Months passed. The branch stabilized, revenue improved, a new client signed a long-term contract. Headquarters sent a brief note of approval. For the first time in his career, Elias's name appeared in a regional performance summary. The recognition felt different than he expected. It did not intoxicate him, it unsettled him, because it revealed a truth he had long avoided. He had never been incapable, he had been afraid that if he stepped fully into visibility and failed, there would be no one left to blame but himself. One evening, as he closed the office, his phone rang. "Daniel, I heard the branch is doing well," his brother said warmly. "Congratulations." "Thank you." There was a pause. "You surprised us, you know." "I know." Another pause. "You were always steady." Elias smiled faintly. "I still am." "But different," Daniel added. "Yes." Silence settled between them, not strained, just unfamiliar. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked finally. Elias considered the question carefully. He was more anxious than he had ever been, more exposed, more uncertain, but he was not invisible. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I am." And for the first time, he did not feel like he was saying it to comfort someone else. That night, alone in his room above the bakery, he stood at the window watching the darkened street below. He thought of the boy holding the empty cake box, the man refilling glasses at a celebration not his own, the employee correcting errors no one knew existed. He did not despise those versions of himself. They had survived the only way they knew how, but survival was no longer enough. He understood now that being chosen last had not been fate, it had been agreement, a quiet contract he had signed without reading, and he had finally torn it up. The wind rattled the glass softly. For once, he did not feel like ground beneath someone else's triumph. He felt something more fragile. And more powerful, he felt visible. Success did not arrive as triumph, it arrived as expectation. By the end of the first year, the branch was no longer fragile. Processes were steady. Clients were consistent. The team functioned without hovering supervision. Elias had learned to step back without disappearing. That, more than profit margins, felt like achievement. And then the letter came, a formal envelope from headquarters, marked confidential. He opened it at his desk, alone. They were restructuring, a senior regional position had opened, overseeing multiple branches, including the one he had built. He was being considered. The promotion would place him above his former boss, above managers who had once described him as not leadership material. It would also require relocation again, more visibility, more scrutiny, more risk. He sat still for a long time after reading it. The old reflex whispered immediately, "You don't need this, you've proven enough, stay where you're steady, stay where you are valued." But beneath that voice, another had grown stronger over the year. It did not urge ambition, it asked a simpler question: are you choosing or avoiding? That evening, he called Marianne. He had not spoken to her in months, though they had exchanged brief updates. "They want to promote me," he said, a pause, "and I don't know if I want it." "Why?" "I'm tired," he admitted. "This year has been loud." She chuckled softly. "Growth usually is." "I finally feel respected here," he continued. "If I leave, I start over again." "Yes." He waited for reassurance. Instead she said, "You are not obligated to keep proving yourself." The statement startled him. "I'm not." "No. But if you decline because you're afraid of being seen again, that's not peace. That's retreat." He leaned back in his chair. "You once told me I made myself small so others could feel tall," he said. "I did. What if I don't want to be tall either?" There was a long silence on the line. "Height isn't the point," she replied gently. "Freedom is." 2 days later, Daniel visited unexpectedly. He stood in Elias's office, glancing around with visible admiration. "You built this," Daniel said quietly. "We built it," Elias corrected automatically, then stopped. "No," he said more firmly. "I built it. With them." Daniel smiled. "I'm proud of you." The words should have satisfied him. For years he had imagined hearing them, but they did not land the way he expected, because he realized something important: he no longer needed them. Daniel leaned against the desk. "Dad mentioned you might move again." "It's possible." "You always surprise me now," Daniel said, half laughing. "I used to think I understood you." Elias studied his brother carefully. "You understood the version of me that made life easier for everyone." Daniel's expression shifted, not defensive, but thoughtful. "I never asked you to do that," he said quietly. "I know." That was the truth. No one had forced him into the role, he had stepped into it willingly, because being necessary had felt safer than being extraordinary. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I admired you," he said. "You never seemed desperate for attention." Elias almost smiled. If only his brother knew how desperate he had once been, not for attention, but for assurance. That night, alone again, Elias walked through the empty office. He touched the back of a chair, the edge of a desk, the glass of the conference room door. He had built something stable, but stability was no longer his hiding place, it was his foundation. He asked himself the question plainly: if you were not afraid, what would you choose? The answer came without hesitation. He would accept, not because he needed recognition, not because he needed to outrank anyone, but because he wanted to see how far he could stand without shrinking. The announcement was made a week later. His team reacted with mixed emotions: pride, disappointment, uncertainty. Alina approached him after the meeting. "You're leaving," she said, not accusing, just processing. "Yes. You told us to step forward," she said. "Now you are." He nodded. "I was afraid you would stay," she admitted. The comment surprised him. "Why?" "Because it would mean you were still afraid." He absorbed the words slowly. He had not realized how closely they had been watching him. Leadership, he understood now, was not about perfection, it was about permission. By stepping forward, he had given them permission to do the same. On his final day, there were no grand speeches, no dramatic farewells, just handshakes. Quiet gratitude. Shared memories. As he locked the office door for the last time, he felt something unfamiliar, not fear, not anticipation, peace, not the old peace of invisibility, but the kind that comes from alignment. Months later, in his new role, challenges multiplied. He made mistakes, public ones, he received criticism, he navigated conflicts between managers twice his age. There were evenings he returned to his apartment exhausted, doubting everything, but the doubts no longer hollowed him, they sharpened him, because they belonged to him. One afternoon, during a high-level meeting, a senior executive dismissed one of his proposals. "Perhaps that's too ambitious," the executive said. "We need someone steady in this position." The word hung in the air, steady. Once, it would have reduced him. Now, he let it settle. "I am steady," he replied calmly. "But I am not small." The room fell silent. He did not raise his voice, he did not argue, he simply held the space, and the executive nodded. "Very well," the man said. "Proceed." It was not dramatic, it was not triumphant, but it was different. Elias did not feel like a substitute, he did not feel like a placeholder, he felt present. Years later, at another family gathering, Daniel raised a glass once more. "To Elias," he said. "Who taught us that being steady doesn't mean standing still?" There was laughter, warm, genuine. Elias smiled, and this time it was not practiced. He looked around the table and saw no hierarchy, no competition, just people. For so long, he had believed he was chosen last, but he understood now, he had been choosing himself last, choosing comfort over courage, approval over authenticity, silence over voice. The world had simply followed his lead. As the evening wound down, he stepped outside for air. The sky above was wide and unremarkable, neither storming nor radiant. He thought of the boy holding the cake box, the man refilling glasses, the employee correcting errors in secret. He did not regret them. They had been steps, necessary ones, but he no longer needed to disappear to feel safe. For once, he was not the steady ground beneath someone else's triumph. He was the architect of his own, and whether he rose higher or stumbled tomorrow mattered less than this simple truth. He was no longer waiting to be chosen, he already had. In the quiet arc of Elias's journey, from cautious beginnings in a new town to the final walk through his office, one truth rises above all: leadership is not about disappearing into responsibility, but about showing up fully, even when it's hard. He faced mistakes with his name on them, truths his team finally told him, and choices that tested his integrity. Yet through each chapter, Elias learned that strength isn't loud, it's steady. That growth doesn't come from titles, but from trust. And that the most powerful moment isn't when others finally see you, it's when you choose to see yourself. The dinner table, filled with warmth and genuine smiles, wasn't just a scene of closure, it was a symbol of arrival. Elias didn't just earn respect. He earned peace. Because the real promotion wasn't on paper. It was in the way he stood, spoke, and stayed true. If you love stories like this, about quiet strength, emotional clarity, and personal growth, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this story reach others who need it.